Now that Hyper-V is installed on my machine, I'm going to go back to the login screen. Our reboot has completed and I'm just logging back in. Once we log in, Server Manager automatically opens. I'm going to select Tools from the top right-hand side of the screen. This gives me a list of my administrative tools. In this list, we now have Hyper-V Manager. This Hyper-V Manager is extremely important to us. Hyper-V Manager is the tool I use to create virtual machines, to create virtual switches. Everything related to virtualization will be performed through this Hyper-V Manager. There are a few prerequisite things we want to do before we just start building virtual machines. One of those is to configure some of the settings. I'm going to full screen my Hyper-V Manager here. On the right-hand side of the screen, one of the settings is the Virtual Switch Manager. I'm going to click this Virtual Switch Manager. Right now, I have no virtual switches. A virtual switch is what allows virtual machines to communicate with each other, also to communicate with machines on your production network, and to get out to the internet. So depending on what type of connectivity I want my virtual machines to have determines what types of virtual switches I want. There are three types of virtual switches that exist: external, internal, and private. One of the things Microsoft does a great job with is explaining the types of configurations you get from each of these switches. If I click the external switch here, this says, creates a virtual switch that binds to the physical network adapter so virtual machines can access the physical network. An external switch is the only type of switch that allows you to connect to the internet or to connect to your production network. If I choose internal or private, there is no possible way I can communicate with machines on the actual network itself. If I look at internal, this says, creates a virtual switch that can be used only by virtual machines that run on this physical computer and between the virtual machines and the physical computer itself. What that means to me, if I create an internal switch, I could build out 3 virtual machines on this computer I'm on right now, on this Hyper-V server. If those virtual machines connect to an internal switch, they can talk to each other and they can communicate directly with the host. By the host, an example of that would be, if I wanted to download a file from the internet, an executable file, and I intend to install that on my virtual machine. Well, if my virtual machine is on an internal switch, there's no possibility that virtual machine can directly connect to the internet. What's possible, I could download the file to the host computer and I could put it in a shared folder. An internal switch would allow me to browse the host machine from the virtual machine, but that's as far as you could communicate. So I could talk to the host machine. Private is very similar to internal. If I create a private switch, it says here in the description, creates a virtual switch that can be used only by virtual machines running on this physical computer. A private switch means the machines can only talk to each other. They cannot communicate directly with the host. They cannot communicate with any machines on my network. So to briefly recap those, if you want to connect to your network or the internet, you have to choose external. If you want to talk to machines on this host and to the host itself, you choose internal. If you only want your machines to be able to talk to each other, you choose private. I want to click Create a Virtual Switch. This brings up a screen that gives me all 3 of those options. So now that we know what they do, we can decide which one we want to select. At any time, you can come back and change a switch from one type to another. If we look at external, an external switch gives me a list of all the network adapters on my machine. So I can select external and the adapter I want it to connect to. That adapter that it's connected to is what your virtual machine would use to talk to the network. An example of this would be if you are on a machine that has a wireless network adapter and an Ethernet network adapter. When you create an external switch, this drop-down would give you your wireless adapter and your Ethernet. So whichever of those adapters you want your virtual machine to use to connect to the network, you would simply choose it in that list. Well, here, since I'm just building a test environment, I'm going to choose a private switch. I'm going to click OK for that. Now, when I click Virtual Switch Manager, I have a new virtual switch here, and it is a private virtual switch type. To avoid confusion, I'm actually going to change this name at the top. I'm going to go ahead and name it private since that's what it actually is, so that avoids confusion. So when I apply that, now I have this switch named private. We'll click OK for that. That is how we configure virtual switches.